It's Wednesday. You all know what that means. It's time for another episode of the Life in the Movies podcast. I'm one of your co hosts. My name is Ryan Cam. Thank you all so much for tuning in. This week, well, Jacob has finally seen Oppenheimer, and that means we can do our definitive Christopher Nolan ranking until he makes his next movie. Anyway, then we'll just have to do it again because we love the guy so much. And we will be beginning our coverage of season one, or well, the mini series, I should say. There was no season two. The mini series, The Defenders. But first up, I got to introduce my co-host, Jacob Martin. Jacob, we are on the other side of Jeepers Creepers. Any nightmares?
No, I did not get any nightmares from watching Jeepers Creepers. It was such a fantastic movie when Jacob Collins invited us for the watch along this past week. I had a good time watching it. It was such a memorable movie. I enjoyed the setup of the film. Despite the controversy surrounding the director, it's still a great movie. Such a good premise. I love the mystery surrounding the mysterious slasher character. And there are some very brutal moments that caught me off guard throughout the course of the film.
Absolutely. And what we are talking about is the live stream that we were a part of over on Jacob Collins' channel, 3D Movie Cinema. That's over on his channel, The Replay, if you would like to go check that out. But I wanted to tell you, Jacob, I looked this up. I'm looking it up now. The budget for the first Jeepers Creepers was only $10 million. dollars.
Wow. And it looks so professionally made. That was what I was impressed by the most was seeing that movie. And there was a lot, they used, I think it was all practical effects too. And that makes it even more awesome.
I'm sure there was some CGI used, but it was only when it was necessary. It was a tool in the toolbox and not the entire canvas, if that makes any sense at all. And also, another fun fact before we do move on, Jacob Collins told me after the fact that the movie was shot in Ocala, Florida, which is an hour and a half west of me. So that's a good reason to stay out of Ocala for a little,
You
stay
don't
away
want to
from
go to
that.
the filming locations of Jeepers Creepers and fear you might get attacked by the Jeeper Creeper dude.
The creeper with the leather wings. But yeah, that's over on Jacob Collins's channel. Go check that out if you are so inclined. We were also joined by Blacktastic Media. It was nice to finally meet him. But real quick, we do have a lot to unpack, but I wanted to ask Jacob, have you been watching anything lately, like one or two things?
I have watched a couple of things. For example, I did, but besides Jeepers Creepers, the other thing that I did check out was Cinderella 3, A Twist in Time. That's for an upcoming celebrating Disney video. It was one of the final direct to video sequels. It's one I had never seen before, but I had always heard actually decent things about the film. People had said it was one of the better direct to video sequels, and some even said it was the best direct to video sequel, and some claim it was better than the original Cinderella from 1950, which I thought was a bit odd because it's a direct to video sequel. But now I've seen it. I think it's a decent sequel, actually. I don't think it tops the original film. I don't think it's one of the best direct to video sequels they've done, but it is far better than it has any right to be. I'm a little mixed on the plot of the film. I'm going to be honest. That's why I wasn't head over heels with the film, because the premise of the film involves the evil stepmother who steals the fairy godmother's wand and uses time travel to undo Cinderella's happily ever after to make Cinderella a servant girl once again and make it to where Anastasia ends up falling in love with the prince. And that whole storyline, I gotta be honest, did feel like a fan fiction to me. It just seemed kind of weird. Yes, the stepmother is a cruel human being. I kind of liked it when she got her comeuppance in the first movie, and you think she'd be moved on from her life since then. But I feel like in this film they turned her into a mustache twirly villain, and it got pretty ridiculous at times. I'm not gonna lie. However, even with that, the movie still embraces the premise, and I have to respect it for that, even though I didn't fully love the story, because there's a lot of things the movie does well. Uh, I always felt like Cinderella and the prince's relationship in the original movie was underdeveloped. In this movie, since Cinderella has is in an alternate timeline where the prince forgot that he danced with Cinderella, they have to fall in love again in this movie. And the chemistry I thought worked. It was a lot more believable to me in this movie than it was in the first movie. And the prince has more of a character compared to the one-dimensional caricature that he was in the first movie. So there's a couple aspects that this movie does improve on, which I have to give credit for that. I also like that Anastasia has a good arc in this movie where she's also tired of the abuse of her mother and she desires the life that Cinderella wants. And throughout the whole time, she has this moral complex of do it. Should I really fall in the footsteps of my mother, or should I try to do the right thing? And I actually did like that with her character. So there's some good stuff in here. There's some really good animation. The songs in here aren't really the best, but the movie does have some good entertainment value, and it's one of the more watchable direct-to-video sequels, even though I can't necessarily say it's a great film.
You can't recommend it, but you can say that it is certainly not terrible.
I
If
would say like I still gave it a mild fresh. It's like 3.5 out of 5, but it's more mixed to positive.
When did time travel get involved in this?
I have no idea. It was one of the weirdest uses of time travel that I think I've seen. I'm a sucker for time travel, but it was kind of a weird story. Still better than Cinderella 2, though. Cinderella 2 wasn't that good.
Yeah, that's what I've always heard, but Cinderella 3 I've heard actually good things about and now heard good things from you, Jacob. So, anything else you got?
Uh, yeah, it was just that, and I think just that and Jeepers Creepers was all I watched last week. What have you watched?
So, quite a bit. Like I said, we've got a lot to unpack in this episode, so I'll just speed run through some of them. But I have not logged this on. I haven't logged Jeepers Creepers on my letterbox yet, but I did really enjoy it. I don't know what star rating I'd give it. I'd have to think it over between like 4 and 4.5. But I'll. But when it is posted, you all will see it if you follow me on my letterboxed link below. But I've been catching up on my Scary Mania watches. I watched. I believe I talked about Dr. Cyclops in the last week's episode. I also watched I Walked with a Zombie, which is a rather strange film to say the least. Pulling up the plot here, it's from 1943, and it's basically about a nurse who goes to the Caribbean, and basically there's this rich guy on the island who uses the natives there as servants or, well, slaves. And there are believed to be zombies on the island, but in reality, it might just be the case that this guy might be doing something medicinal to them. This is a weird watch. I feel like thematically, like I get what they were trying to do with it because of the time place that it is, and I feel like if it were made today, it would get a lot more praise. But I don't know. I still have to really think it over on this one. But one that I genuinely really liked was my next watch, which was 1956's Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Not the one starring Donald Sutherland. That was the remake. This is the original from the mid 1950s, directed by Don Siegel and starring Kevin McCarthy and Dana Winner. And basically, it's about a small town in California, and basically this doctor begins noticing that the townspeople are not who he thinks they are, and they're basically slowly being taken over by aliens who come out of pods. And when the natives of the town, the townspeople fall asleep, they basically get assimilated. So you take dream and sleep aspect of Nightmare on Elm Street and cross it over with something like, say, the Cybermen from Doctor Who. That's kind of like what Invasion of the Body Snatchers is. This is a very creepy movie. It's only 80 minutes long, but it just crams a lot into a little. I was thinking going into it, I'm like, okay, I know what's going on here. The guy is gonna like go crazy, and then they're not going to believe him. And he goes crazy, and then people actually believe him, and they go and close off the town and they go and do their thing. So that was rather refreshing to say the least. But like I said, genuinely creepy stuff. When main character is when Benel kisses his lover Becky when she's about to fall asleep, and then she gets assimilated, and the look that the camera has, like with the water and the sweat and just the wide-eyed like, oh no, like it was like gut-wrenching stuff. So for a 1956 horror movie, we tend to look on it and say like that doesn't hold up. That held up tremendously well. So Invasion of the Body Snatchers, I don't know how it is held up pop culture wise, but it's a movie that I would highly recommend.
Yeah, I actually have seen the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I've never seen the remake, but it is a really good movie. It does leave you on the edge of your seat. There's a really good mystery behind it. And even though it was technically a B movie, it still had some great performances and some good filmmaking for the time.
Yeah, in my 50s section of Scary Mania, I've got the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers, The Fly, starring Vincent Price, not the Jeff Goldblum one, the one starring Vincent Price. And then The Blob, starring Steve McQueen, which is a bit of a nostalgia trip for me because it was one of the first horror movies I ever watched. I took a college class called Scientific Themes in Film, and one of the films we watched was The Blob. So it's going to be really nice to go back and revisit that. And just to kind of put these all into one, sticking with the horror theme, I've been slowly catching up on all the Friday the 13th movies that I have missed. So up to this point, I just started part 7 or 6. I know they all kind of blend together, I know, but to be completely honest, I've kind of enjoyed these. I kind of like the honesty of them. I like the at least effort, like effort in terms of the effects from Tom Savini and just the general atmosphere of it. Like, I can't put my finger on why I do like them so much, but I guess I'll have to really think it over. But I started watching it because in one of the trivia leagues I'm a part of, there's a category called horror icons, which is all the Halloween movies, all of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, and all of the Jason movies. And you got to answer questions from any of those. So this is kind of a catch up mission for me. I've only seen up until this point parts 1 and 2, and I'm up to now 6. And I can honestly say I haven't hated any of them. I have heard that it's like once it starts to like get into the new blood and then Jason Takes Manhattan, that's where things go really off, really take a dip in quality. So I'm not looking forward to that. But I am at least intrigued to see what happens next,
Yeah.
which I wasn't exactly looking forward to it, but I was like, I gotta know this for trivia purposes. So I started watching it, and I'm like, these are kind of fun. Like I appreciate the like they're not high art. They are refined garbage, if that makes any sense at all. But again, I do appreciate just how kind of honest they are. They're not trying to be anything more than they are. And I have often said with horror movies, like stuff with like Ari Aster, that they try to be high art to the expense of the story and the characters. With something like Friday the 13th, it's very much a what you see is what you get kind of thing. Jason Voorhees, big guy, hockey mask, throwing around a machete, slicing people up. That's what they were advertised, and that's what you get. So that's really going to be up to you, but I'm enjoying them, at least so far.
Yeah, I haven't watched many of the Friday the 13th movies. In fact, the only one I've seen is the original. And to be honest, I was real disappointed in it because I did not know the reveal of who was actually doing what. And spoiler alert, it was not Jason in the first movie, something that Scream jokingly makes fun of. And I was just kind of bored by it, and it wasn't really one of my favorite horror movies. Didn't care for any of the characters or anything like that. I'd never really had a drive to watch the Jason led Friday the 13th films because of it, but maybe one of these days. And I think I have heard some of the ones in the 90s went off the rails because I think they did one called Jason Goes to Hell. And then there's like Jason X where he's in space for no reason.
Yeah, it's this one and this one. Yeah, and I haven't seen Jason X yet, but in that movie, I've seen this clip a ton of times. He being Jason, pronouns pal, takes this woman is in the space station, shoves her head in like not dry ice, but it's like liquid nitrogen. Her face freezes, and then he takes it out and smashes it on the counter. I'm like, well, credit where credit's due. At least some of these deaths are really original. I've never seen anything like it or since.
Oh,
But yeah, these movies are at least fun so far. I'm not looking forward to the other later ones, but I guess we'll just see what happens. But pass it off to all of you. What have you all been watching lately? Let us know in the comments. Love to read what you have to say. Well, let's, Jacob, dive into The Defenders. We are living in a post Iron Fist world, and it is a good thing. Is The Defenders Season 1, Episode 1, called The H Word. Matt Murdock, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, and Danny Rand investigate criminals and fight injustice, unaware their paths are about to cross. So I say we live in a post Iron Fist world, but literally the first of the Defenders that we see is Iron Fist. I'm like, no, we just left. But thankfully, it's not terrible like what they have him doing. It's at least going towards a goal of some kind. But it's literally the reveal of the Defenders is bad with Iron Fist, good with Jessica Jones, better with Luke Cage, and then best with Daredevil. I was so happy. You all have no idea when I saw Matt Murdock and Foggy Nelson. I was happy to see both of those guys. When I saw Foggy with the short hair, I was like, my boy, and he's got it dipped up and manicured, or not manicured, but he's got it trimmed now because it was like, oh yeah, Foggy and the Nelson and Murdoch is no more, so he's a part of Hogarth's firm now. So that's rather depressing. But again, like there's promising things in this episode. I don't think it's necessarily great, but there's enough in it to where I was like, I'm at least interested to see what happens. Jacob, what about you?
Yeah, I think we're on the same page. I thought for a first episode, it was really good. I thought it was better than the entirety of Iron Fist's first episode, and so I thought
That's
that
a
was good. And
that's a very
even the stuff we did get with Iron Fist was better written than what we got in the entirety of the Iron Fist show, because, like you said, it's building towards something that I'm intrigued by, and I'm excited to see what they're going to do with it. There's like this whole mystery that with Sigourney Weaver, which I didn't know who was going to be on the show. She's this woman who's like dying of cancer or something, and she's making a deal with Madame Gao, and I'm sure that's going to lead to some consequences there. Um, don't know where that's going to lead, but I like Sigourney Weaver, and I want to see if she's going to leave a lasting mark on this show. But I like that this embraces the crossover appeal of all of these shows that we've seen so far. We got Daredevil, Iron Fist, Luke Cage, and Jessica Jones. We get to see what they're doing after their shows. And a lot of the supporting characters from all the shows make appearances in here, but it never felt forced in this case. Like even I criticize Rosario Dawson randomly appearing in all of the other Netflix shows, but yet it works in the Defenders because I think I liked her involvement in Luke Cage the most, and since she's the love interest of Luke Cage, it makes sense why she's in this show compared to when she was on the Iron Fist show. It just felt like a lazy way to connect her with the hand. And I enjoyed seeing where these characters are, and it's a slower paced episode because it's more like playing catch up with the characters. But I felt like the showrunners did a good job of establishing where these characters are at in this stage in life and building up the fact that eventually they're going to team up to take on the hand. And I'm excited for the potential of that. The one real gripe I have with the episode, the one action scene we did get with Iron Fist, I thought sucked. Like the editing was terrible with the quick edits and stuff. I'm like, the other, even Iron Fist had good action choreography. This just felt like a very amateurish style of filmmaking that I was really tired of seeing. And then they mixed that with slow mo shots that felt like poor man Zack Snyder. And I did not care for that action scene. I wasn't fully hooked on the show until after the title sequence. But other than that, I really enjoyed the show, or at least this first episode.
I legit was like, all right, who like this has felt like a completely different show action wise because even in Iron Fist, and we all, Jacob and I, our thoughts on Iron Fist season one are well documented. The action in that was solid. That is the only redeeming part of that whole show, that whole season of television. This action scene in the sewers of Cambodia sucked. It sucked from the very beginning to the very end. And it felt like amateur hour. It really did. And just it wasn't great. But to your point also, Sigourney Weaver, I legit forgot she was in this show. I remember seeing her in the promos, but again, that was like 2017 when we first started hearing about it. Seeing her here, I was like, whoa, Sigourney Weaver was in the MCU and no one said anything about it, or well, kind of the MCU timeline aside. But yeah, seeing her was a very nice thing because if for nothing else, she will at least be good in this show. And to top that off, basically, she is dying. So there is a time clock on whatever she and the hand have planned. So that's going to give this show, I believe, a sense of urgency, which is something that is desperately needed.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I also saw that this is only 8 episodes instead of 13, and I think 8 episodes will work better because the shows will not overstay its welcome. It'll have plenty of time to give the characters breathing room of what they need, set up the conflict, and resolve it efficiently. Because some of these shows, especially Iron Fist, did not need 13 episodes. I feel like with Iron Fist, they were stretching it too thin. And going back with what you said about that action scene that sucked, what I also didn't like was that I couldn't tell who was fighting who in that sequence. I didn't realize it was Iron Fist until the very end. And that's a poor sign of a bad action sequence that you can't even tell who your characters are until the very end.
No doubt whatsoever. Like I said, everything involving Iron Fist was subpar. The Jessica Jones stuff I thought had promise, but at first I was like, really, we're back to where we started with Jessica Jones with the whole like, I'm not expecting her to be like, I'm Jessica Jones now. But, like, I'm not expecting that with the whole thing of her not wanting any attention. I just thought it was like, didn't we just go over this with freaking Kilgrave? But no, I don't know. It was just weird flex with her, but against Kristen Ritter, she is at least going to carry this.
Yeah.
So I am looking forward to what she brings.
And I will agree. The best aspects of this show are still Luke Cage and Daredevil. They are the
By,
two best characters by far. And
by a
so
lot.
when the attention was focused on them, that's when the show had my fullest attention. Seeing Luke Cage reunite with the Claire Rosario's character and picking up where that left off after he was wrongfully put in prison, and then Matt Murdock reuniting with Karen Page and getting that relationship back on track again, I thought was actually very refreshing to watch after the dud that was Iron Fist.
Also, a very interesting note that I wanted to bring up Daredevil, like, Daredevil, Matt Murdock will just use that interchangeably. You can kind of tell, and they don't spend a lot of time on this. They just say enough to be like, this is the status quo now. He hasn't been Daredevil for quite a while. I believe if I read the IMDb right, this show set a few months after the events of the second season of Daredevil and a month after the events of Iron Fist. So where we left off, Nelson and Murdoch is no more, and you have to believe that Matt Murdock has not been Daredevil for quite some time, at least a couple of months, because he gets the feeling of he needs to go stop a crime, but then the police stop it, and then he goes and he crushes that court hearing. So it's very obvious that without the burden of Daredevil, Matt Murdock has been doing quite well in the legal world. But again, this is a Defenders show, so you're going to have to go back to the hood at some point, especially when the hand is involved. But it kind of reminded me of Spider-Man 2 when Peter Parker lost his powers temporarily and his life improved, but everything else, like crime-wise, just went completely down the toilet. So
Well,
that's going to be an interesting dynamic, I think.
well, I'm also reminded too because when he talked with Karen, he said things are better without being the daredevil. Then we find out when he makes the confession to the Catholic priest that he lied about that. He actually misses being daredevil, and it's going to be interesting this duality that's going to be played, and I hope it's better explored here than what happened in season two, which I thought had some very it went into some weird misdirections that made it a disappointment compared to the first season. But Charlie Cox is still awesome, and so far the stuff with Matt Murdock and Luke Cage are the best elements of the show so far.
I think this episode is really the perfect picture of our coverage of these shows. You take the good with the bad. You know, you got the Iron Fist and Jessica Jones stuff, which is mediocre at best, and then you get a Luke Cage and Daredevil. They're by far and away more interesting. So I would say, and I don't know if you agree with me on this, Jacob, be comfortable in calling this episode a mixed bag. However, definitely better than Iron Fist, but that's a low bar to clear.
I would go past the mixed bag because even with Iron Fist and Jessica Jones, I was still invested in it. Even though I don't care for them as much, I still felt like I was more invested in these characters. Not that I actually thought Jessica Jones was a solid show as a whole. It took some missteps near the end, but I still thought it was a good show overall. The only one that I didn't like was Iron Fist, and but even the Iron Fist stuff and the Defenders, I still, aside from that terrible action sequence, the scene where you see him struggling with PTSD, I thought was actually very well handled.
That part, like, I get what they were going for, but it was like the inner Gene Siskel in me. A dream sequence. I wanted to punch a hole in the screen. Like it was that whole thing. So the dream sequence part was annoying, but I like how they're going deeper with Danny Rand, and I hope that they do go in a direction like that. So it's like two things can be true at once, I guess. But solid start to the show overall, and it's only 8 episodes, so this will be a very quick watch for the two of us. But I passed off to all of you. What did you all think of The Defenders season 1, episode 1? Let us know in the comments. Love to read what you have to say. Well, Jacob, it's main event time. It is the Christopher Nolan ranking. So, like our other rankings in the past, I'm going to do my 13, 13, 12, 12, 11, 11. But
I
I
thought they
think
were,
we're going to have fun with this
I
because
thought
I
they
think
were, I thought they were only 12 Christopher Nolan movies.
13 including Oppenheimer,
Let's see,
unless I have my math wrong. I have
following
3, 4, 5,
Memento.
6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Oh no, right. You are
Okay,
absolutely right. It
all
is.
right. Yeah, because I thought it was 12. I think
I
he did a short film before following, but uh
math is my weakest subject in school, y'all. Can you tell? But yeah. Um, but I think we can both agree Nolan is one of, if not our favorite working directors right now.
absolutely. Like there's no bad movie on this list, FYI. I enjoy all the Christopher Nolan films, There's some I enjoy more, and we'll get into that in the ranking and why I've ranked him the way I have. But he has not made a bad film, and even my least favorite Christopher Nolan film, there's still some great technical merits to him, and they're still worth great discussions.
Well, why don't you get the ball rolling? What is your number 12, the bottom of the barrel?
For me, that would go to Following, which was his first film from 1998. Still a good movie all around, though. Very low budget. I think it's only like just over an hour long, made on a very minuscule budget with like $1,000. Cast as friends. So I think this one does have an unfair advantage compared to his other films because it doesn't have that polish compared to some of the films that we know Christopher Nolan today. But for a first time movie, it's not bad. The ideas are there. I was invested in the story. The non-linear stuff, I think with it being shot in black and white, made it a little hard to follow at times. But I still thought it had an interesting plot. You could definitely see the seeds planted and with some of his other movies. Like I think some of the ideas that Nolan did in Following, he better executed in Memento, and we'll get to that one when we get there. And I thought the twist in this film was solid, but this one I think did not because he cast his friends. The acting definitely is not the best, and you could definitely tell this film was made by an amateur. But you can still see potential for greatness to come in this movie. But compared to all the other films, it's my least favorite.
Yeah, that's a slight punt. We're still in the neighborhood, but we'll get to that in a minute. My number 12, and I've seen some people being like, it's not that bad, guys. And I will agree the effort is certainly there, but I'm sorry, I gotta go Tenet. I did not enjoy this movie at all. I enjoyed the effort more than the content of it itself. Nolan blew up an actual airplane to get the result he needed for this movie. I admire the effort. But man, this movie was hard work to get through. Not just because it was July of 2020 and COVID and that whole thing. We don't need to revisit that. I appreciate John David Washington. I appreciate Robert Pattinson. I appreciate Elizabeth Debicki and Kenneth Branagh and Himish Patel and Aaron Taylor Johnson. They are trying. But man, this movie, like I said, it was hard work. And really, you couldn't hear the thing first and foremost. It was like they were speaking in tongues. Like you just barely hear what they were saying. And then to top that off is a very confusing story. Is John David Washington an agent working for someone? It's like Inception, but without any of the emotion attached to Inception. So again, not a terrible movie, far from the worst, and I will give credit where credit is due. The effort is more than certainly present, but man, this was just like he didn't get the basics right. You couldn't hear the thing.
All right, I'll put Tenet's my number 11, so I'll talk about that one. I uh I really like Tenet. It's a good movie. I agree with a lot of your points though. The sound mixing is terrible in this movie. I don't know what Nolan was thinking in this one because of all the movies that he's done, the dialogue is inaudible for most of the movie, and like the sound effects and the music and everything overpower the dialogue, which was such a weird choice. I've seen this movie twice, and I still don't fully grasp what Nolan was trying to do with this movie on a story level. The basic concept of Tenet, I get with the inverted time, and you got John David Washington on this mission to retrieve something, and there is some heart to this movie. I don't think this movie fully lacks emotion because you have Elizabeth Debicki, who's in an abusive relationship, and she's trying to get out of it and better raise her son. That aspect, I thought there is some emotion there, and there is some heart to the story with her character, and she does give a good performance. But yeah, but once it goes into the time bending stuff, it is hard to follow. And I've seen the film twice, and I can't say I fully understand the logistics of this movie. I will admit that. But I respect Nolan's ambitions though in this movie. Like the action sequences, the visual effects, the practical effects, Ludwig Göransson's score. There's so many amazing stuff in this movie still. Like you mentioned, Ryan, he blew up an actual jet just to get it into the movie, and it was pretty awesome. And some of the stuff how they pulled off the reversed inverted time of cars going backwards, people flying around, bullets ricocheting and flying to and from. There's some cool stuff in this movie, and I respect the ambitions of this film. I still think there's a lot of great stuff in this movie, but I think out of all of Nolan's films, I can see why some would label this as most pretentious film because I feel like at parts it feels like it's confusing for the sake of being confusing, but it's still a neat premise, and I still respect the heck out of this movie.
All right, fair enough. Well, my number 11 is following. So that was the slight pun from earlier. I respect this movie a lot more than I like it. I feel like Nolan found his style and he just elaborated on that as his career progressed. Like I think I don't like I said, I don't think this movie is necessarily it's certainly not his best. I don't think it's in the upper tier, but at the same time, again, I like it because Nolan took whatever he had around him and made a Christopher Nolan movie with it. So I admire his ambition there, and I see this as kind of his Rosetta Stone, as like what what you like or hate about the movies started here. So I did appreciate that, and on like a micro budget. So I have a great appreciation for filmmakers who can make great movies on like minuscule budgets, like Blair Witch Project or the first Paranormal Activity, for example.
Yeah, it's still a pretty good movie, but it was hard ranking it compared to his other films, which had bigger budgets.
But let's move on. That was my 11. Jacob, your 11 was Tenet.
So going into the top 10, my number 10, this might seem like a low placement because so many people rave this film. But my number 10 at the moment is Oppenheimer. I
I
see that weird look.
I okay, I need to hear this. Please go ahead.
Okay, nothing against the film. Oppenheimer is a terrific film.
Okay.
I love uh, so much about this movie, even with it being a 3 hour historical drama where dialogue is front and center. I was captivated from start to finish. Uh, the movie moves at such a good pace. The movie has excellent performances. Cillian Murphy completely transforms into J. Robert Oppenheimer. He gives an outstanding performance, and I was very invested in his character. And I like that the movie shows that he's not the most likable character. He does have a lot of flaws. He's a womanizer. He has questionable morals, but yet he's the one who was responsible for the creation of the atomic bomb nonetheless. And it was a fascinating character study. Robert Downey Jr. is amazing in this movie. I can see him being a front runner for best supporting actor because he was amazing in the film. Almost didn't recognize him in the film, but he's did an amazing job. Great supporting cast: Emily Blunt, Florence Pugh, Josh Hartnett was really good in the film, and even people have random roles that are hardly in the film, but it's great seeing them in the film. Even Alden Ehrenreich, who I think got slammed on too much for playing Han Solo, but it was good seeing him in this movie and having a pretty good minor role for the scenes that he was given. The reason the movie's number 10, I don't think this is one of his more rewatchable movies compared to the movies higher up on the list. I feel like these other Nolan films I will rewatch a lot more compared to Oppenheimer. And also, the nonlinear structure in this movie, I don't think was needed in Oppenheimer. I get it, it's part of Nolan's flair, But Nolan, you can still have the Nolan flair without the nonlinear structure because how he pulled off the explosion I thought was fantastic with the sound mixing and everything, along with the way he visualized the mechanics of Oppenheimer's mind. I thought was absolutely very brilliant. But I will say, as someone unfamiliar with Oppenheimer's story, some of the nonlinear stuff where you see flashbacks of his past mixed with the stuff he's doing, creating the bomb, and even the stuff after the bomb where he's clashing with Robert Downey Jr.'s character. I'm like, sometimes it was hard for my brain to fathom where we were in time in this movie. And I think it did knock a little bit of points because of that. However, it's still a fantastic movie. One of the best movies that I've seen in 2023. One of my favorite theatrical experiences in a while because I was so immersed, especially when the bomb went off with the silence, seeing people's reactions to the bomb going off. And then Oppenheimer says that line, "I am death, the destroyer of worlds." And then you hear the full impact of the blast. And I was at an AMC theater watching this movie, and the seats were rattling like crazy. I felt like I was living this moment. It was crazy. And that just shows you how great of a director Christopher Nolan is, that he is so committed to the cinematic in the cinematic theatrical experience. I still really enjoy this movie and appreciate this movie. And I appreciate how challenging and thought provoking of a movie it is as well, and how it addresses its themes with the war and the bomb being on the world, the ethics of whether that was a good or bad thing or not. I appreciated a lot out of this movie, but I just prefer the other films on the list.
Okay, yeah, that is fair enough. Obviously, it's going to be a huge punt, so we will be getting back to this movie. But for my number 10, for my number for my number 10, I am going with Memento. Now, this is the movie that pretty much launched Christopher Nolan, and I'm sure at the time I would have loved to have seen this like back in the year 2000 when it dropped and just see how many people's minds were just blown by this movie. So I'd love to do that, but my reasoning is that kind of like what your reasoning is with this with your choice at 10, Jacob. I just prefer his other movies more. Again, kind of like Following, this is kind of like what Memento is like Following, but with a bigger budget. It's very similar in its structure and what it's trying to go for. Guy Pearce is very good in the movie, and so is Carrie Ann Moss. I'm glad I looked it up beforehand. And Joe Pantoliano is good as well as Teddy. It's an intriguing mystery, but I feel like the non-linear stuff, I've been very forgiving of Nolan because he makes it work. But it feels like out of all of his movies, the non-linear is more confusing in this movie than any of his others. So that's where I stand on it. Not a terrible movie by any means. It's very good. But it's one of those things where Following and Memento are good, but he's got bigger things in his head. And we would later find out that yes, he does. So not a knock on the film's quality. It's just it's it's a way it's like a small fish in a big pond, I guess.
Yeah, I can definitely respect that. I've only seen Memento once, and you'll see where it falls on my ranking. Uh, I I had it higher on my Nolan ranking at one point, but with over time, I'm like, like you'll just see where it's gonna go when I get to it. But coming at number 9, I think this is one of his more underrated films. But because much like with Oppenheimer, I prefer the other films. This is my number 9. My number 9 is Insomnia. And to me, this is Nolan's most slept on movie, the movie that nobody has ever, not too many people have talked about. It was released in 2002, released sandwiched in between Memento and Batman Begins. But it is still a great movie. I think some people dismiss it because I think it's the only Christopher Nolan film where Nolan didn't write his screenplay, because I think it was based on existing material. And I think some people believe that this is like the least Nolan film because of that. But I don't see it as a bad thing. You still see Nolan's flair in his directing and how he's able to get his performers, his actors to act in this movie. And I felt like this movie still had a great premise that felt deserving of the Christopher Nolan name, where you got Al Pacino's character who goes up to Alaska to investigate a murder. His character is an insomniac, and he's in Alaska during the time where the sun never sets during that one part of the year, and he can't sleep because of that, and he goes more insane the more the movie goes along. The performances in here are terrific. Al Pacino, my probably one of his best performances and most slept on performances, because he plays a protagonist where he makes a lot of morally great decisions. He's not the most likable character, and he does questionable things in the movie. Yet you still want to root for him in taking down the person who is messing with him throughout the course of the movie. And that leads into my other favorite thing about this movie is Robin Williams, who plays the villain of the movie. And it is it's so odd to hear Robin Williams in a villainous performance. And yet he pulled it off incredibly well. Like I had read at one point that Robin Williams wanted to play a Batman villain throughout the course of his career. Like he auditioned to play the Joker and Tim Burton's Batman and the Riddler and Batman Forever, but that didn't work out. And if this is the closest thing Robin Williams could have been as the Joker, he gave an outstanding performance, and he got under my skin throughout this movie. And that's Robin Williams, the guy that the guy who played the genie in Aladdin, one of my favorite voice performances of all time. And that's no easy feat. So it's still a great movie. It's just much like with Oppenheimer. The other Nolan films I think are better, and I think I'll rewatch them far more of an insomnia. But in my opinion, this is his most slept on movie.
Couldn't agree more. Insomnia is my number 9 as well. So yeah, for all the reasons that you've said, Robin Williams is a creep in this movie and really speaks to his talent because we all know him for, like you said, Genie in Aladdin, Good Morning Vietnam, very goofy, very over the top. But something like, say, 1 Hour Photo or this, the dude knew how to play a villain. Like, he knew how to be a creep. It was like very, he had that switch that he would flip every once in a while where he would play something serious or downright psychotic. Like one of my favorite performances of his in Good Will Hunting, where he won an Oscar. Like, he's a completely different actor in that movie. He has his funny moments, sure, but he's such a tragic character that you look at it and you go, that's Robin Williams. Like that is like that's Mork, and he's like a completely different human. So Ron Williams, rest in peace, one of our finest talents ever. And Al Pacino is a predictably excellent in this as well. Again, it feels like Nolan, because he's so good, feels like following Memento and Insomnia are like really good, but Nolan's other movies are just so much better that it's like with they're low, meaning that like we're dumping on them. We're really not. I promise you, folks. We're trying our hardest not to. But what is your number 8 there, Jacob?
My number 8, it's Memento. I'm gonna go Memento on this one, which seems low to some because I know people who rate this in their top tier, and it is a great movie. I've only seen this movie one time, but I still think it's a terrific film. I think the reason why I love the movie and why I respect it so much is the premise where the entire film is told backwards. We're seeing the ending of the movie first, where it's Guy Pearce getting revenge. We don't know why he's doing this, but then we play the movie backwards where we pick up the pieces where he's this guy that has memory loss and is trying to pick up all the pieces, and we see that he is a very unreliable narrator. If you told the story forward, that would ruin the surprise of the movie. It would ruin the fact that what we know about Guy Pearce's character, and the rest of the movie would feel shallow and hollow in comparison. What's brilliant about this movie is we're seeing the story told in reverse, which makes the story, in my opinion, play out more like a tragedy. And Guy Pearce does an incredible job at playing a character who can't really function because of the memory loss and forgetting things, characters easily manipulating him because they know he forgets easily. And it's he gives such a tragic performance, and it might arguably be the best performance of his career in the roles I've seen. But Carrie Ann Moss is also really good in the film as well. It's another one where, much like with Oppenheimer and Insomnia, I love this movie, but I love the other Nolan films more. So it can't go any higher than where it is on the ranking. But it is still a really good film. Obviously, this is the film that pretty much kind of launched Nolan's career. It at least gave him attention in Hollywood because I think this was independently made. And you got to give this movie credit for being the kicker to the career that we ended up getting from Christopher Nolan. And so it's still, this movie was kind of like what Pulp Fiction was to Quentin Tarantino, if you think about it.
Yeah, agreed. That was your number eight, correct?
Yes.
All right, so for my number eight, I am going with, and again, this is a movie that I defend quite frequently. I am going with The Dark Knight Rises. Now, I know that seems very low, and I have heard every defense, like every negative thing in the world about The Dark Knight Rises, and I can understand where people are coming from. I've unironically loved this movie from day one, and nothing in subsequent rewatches has gone towards that fact. It's the weakest of the trilogy, the Dark Knight trilogy, by a lot, but even still, this was about as ideal an ending as you could ever ask for a trilogy like this. You see Christian Bale's Batman at his weakest. You got Tom Hardy's Bane, which I will defend all the live long day. You got Anne Hathaway as Catwoman, who again I defend for a very realistic Batman trilogy. She's about as good a Catwoman as you could ever ask for. Basically, this movie is two halves: the lead up to the stadium bomb, and then after the stadium bomb, was done, which was done CGI, yes, but there was a lot of practical stuff in here as well. And the stadium scene still gives me goosebumps to this day, where you see Hines Ward, who was a real football player, like running, and then you see the field blow up behind him, and he turns around and you go, "Oh crap!" And just Gotham just falling, and then Bane walking out here and is like laying out his master plan. It's great. And then earlier you had Bane and Batman in the Batcave, which was just it's such a good scene, dude. It's just so good. It's the weakest of the trilogy, but I will defend this movie all the live long day. It's really good.
That'll lead into my number seven because my number seven is The Dark Knight Rises. I definitely agree it's the weakest in the trilogy, but that does not make it a bad movie. This is such a fantastic trilogy that something's got to be in last place, much like the original Star Wars trilogy and the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy. All fantastic movies, but somebody's got to be in last place. And in this case, my least favorite of the trilogy is Dark Knight Rises. But I agree with everything you said. It's still a fantastic movie, a great ending for what Christopher Nolan wanted to do with his Batman character. I would argue this is Christian Bale's best performance as Batman because of how broken he is, which makes his return to Batman more inspiring. Like the scene where he comes out of the pit is one of like the biggest like cheering moments I would say in any movie that I've watched. I get goosebumps every time I see that. There's some great action set pieces. But I think there's a little bit more CGI in this film compared to some of Nolan's other films, but that and the practical are still blended very seamlessly that I don't mind that. One of my favorite action set pieces is actually the opening where Bane hijacks the plane and that whole sequence where the plane gets dissolved and all the characters all the plane's dangling like this, and Bane is grabbing the other guy, and then the plane attaches to another plane, and Bane grabs the guy he's trying to kidnap, like the bomb maker, and they attach themselves to the other plane, and they crash the other plane, making it look like an accident. That was some very suspenseful stuff, and I love the craftsmanship of that sequence. I love the final act is very suspenseful with the ticking of the clock and the bomb going off pre Oppenheimer. I thought that was very suspenseful and well done. Tom Hardy as Bane is a great villain. I love Catwoman, played by Anne Hathaway. I even like Joseph Gordon-Levitt in this movie as their, I guess, realistic version of the character who would become Robin. I thought this was a really good movie. People do tend to crap on it, a lot of which I think is based on nitpicks, but the stuff they complain about never took me out of the movie. And I still think it's a fantastic movie and a great closure to the trilogy.
100%. That whole scene with the plane is just so fantastic with Aidan Gillen as the CIA op, and he's like torturing the guys, like the thieves, and one of them is Bane, and you get the Bane reveal of no one knew who I was till I put on the mask. It's just a great, great, great stuff. And to know that it was like a real plane that got worked on, I'm just like, this man Nolan is just on another level. It's his world and we're living in it. But that's my 8, that's your 7. So my number 7, and again, I don't hate this movie. I defend this movie regularly as just a fantastic piece of work and a piece of business. Dunkirk. Now, Dunkirk is a movie that people say there are no characters. Yes, there are. This is not like Saving Private Ryan, where it's a deep thematic story about people going and finding a private and bringing him home. This is a rescue mission. This is a crap situation in which these people are trying to get out of and just pulling it out by the skin of their teeth, which the Dunkirk landings were. That's what they were pretty much. It was a rear guard action. It was the Battle of the Alamo, and they just barely made it out. I will defend this movie till my dying breath. It's fantastic. I mean, just the entire cast got their working boots on. Even Harry Styles. Harry Styles pulls in a good performance here as one of the soldiers. But you got Fionn Whitehead, you got Tom Hardy as the pilot, you got Mark Rylance, Cillian Murphy, again, one of Nolan's boys. He, of course, crushes it as the shivering soldier. That is his character name. You got Barry Keoghan before he was famous. This is a movie, like I said, I will defend it till my dying day. It's not about characters. It's about human beings surviving. And really, it's about the triumph of human nature because these people literally got in their personal boats. They sailed across the English Channel and picked up these soldiers and got them out. That's awesome. That's like humanity deserved a gold star for that.
And that leads into my number 6 because my number 6 is Dunkirk. I think this is another terrific film from Christopher Nolan. And going into the criticism about that the movie has no characters, I do agree with you, Ryan. I don't think that was supposed to be the focus of this movie. It was on like deep character studies of characters surviving in war. To me, it's more so the visual experience with what the battle was like, with the 3 different topics that it addresses: the battle on land, the battle in air, and the battle on sea, and even the how it plays around with time and the nonlinear storytelling to keep each aspect of the battle very well paced and engaging, where you're all invested in every single aspect of the battle. The cast do an incredible job with what they're given, especially Mark Rylance, Cillian Murphy, and Tom Hardy. I remember seeing this for the first time, and I saw an IMAX screening of Dunkirk, and it was such an immersive movie because of it being intentionally filmed in IMAX. I thought the film has some great technical merits to it. It's, I think, Nolan's one of his shortest movies. I'm glad it wasn't 2.5, 3 hours, because I think with it not being as character centric, I think it would have overstayed its welcome. But Nolan told the story effectively. I thought the action, the effects, the visual storytelling is well done. This, in my opinion, is Nolan's most immersive movie, and it's still a remarkable work of art.
100%. And it contains one of my favorite like last acts of any Nolan film where Kenneth Branagh puts up his binoculars, and his other officers like, "What is it?" And he's like, "Home." And you just see all the boats out on the water. I'm just like, I'm getting goosebumps now just thinking about it. It's so good. Like Dunkirk is just excellent. But that was your number six,
My
right?
number six, yes.
So it's my number five now, and my number five. And again, this is another movie
Actually, I think it's your number six. Yeah,
that is
because
right. That is right. Yes, I get my numbers mixed up. That is my number six. So my number six, I'm going with a movie that at first I was like, okay, this was kind of good, but as the years have gone on, the more of an appreciation I've gained for it. It's a little movie called Interstellar. When I first saw this movie, it was in 2014, so I was like, I believe I was 15 years old. 97 to 15. Like I said, I suck at math, y'all. So I was in my teenage years, my teen angst, if you will. And I liked the movie, but I didn't love it. I guess I respected the craft more than what Nolan was going for. As I've gotten older, this movie has just gotten better and better and better. And really, it all falls onto a couple things. Matthew McConaughey just crushing it in this movie, and Anne Hathaway and Michael Caine and Timothy Chalamet, and let me get the name right before I say Jessica Chastain. Jessica Chastain. I was almost calling her Bryce Dallas Howard. They're all great too. But Matthew McConaughey more than earns his flowers while he is still alive in this movie. The scene that has been memed to death at this point, where he is reliving all the things that he has missed from his time in space, it breaks my heart watching it every single time, no matter how many times I see it. It legit breaks my heart. And just knowing that they're on this planet and it's a day for them, but it's 5 years or even more back on Earth. It's crushing. It's soul crushing stuff. And then just knowing how much practical effects went into that as well, and the incredible score, which just again I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about the score. What holds it back ever so slightly is the fact that a lot of it is very on the nose with the whole like Earth is dying kind of thing, and Matt Damon playing a character named Dr. Man. Do you get it? Because humanity is evil, you see. So it was very much a do you get it? But it doesn't hold it back from me. This is still technically Nolan's most ambitious film, I'd say, and he pretty much crushed it.
Yeah, you'll find out my thoughts on Interstellar in just a minute. But
Ooh,
going into my top five,
that's a
my number
punt. I
five
did
is
not
back.
expect that.
What?
That's a punt. Didn't think that'd be so high up for yours, but let's get into that again.
Yeah, you'll see where it goes. Number five is Batman Begins. This is such a special movie for me. This movie, even though I had seen the other Batman movies before Batman Begins, I didn't fully appreciate Batman as a character until I saw Batman Begins. This one, I think, out of all the, and even post Nolan's trilogy with what Zack Snyder did with the character and now Matt Reeves, I still think Christopher Nolan, in my opinion, made the definitive Batman with his trilogy. And it started with Begins, which is such a fantastic origin story for the character. He did such a good job of focusing on what makes Bruce Wayne and how the trauma of his past led to him becoming Batman. I love the focus on his training and how he learned his skills. I love the theatrics of how he came up with the costume, his obsession with bats, and everything that we know about the character. This movie did such a great job with that. Christian Bale is fantastic as Batman. And I still stand by this out of all of the actors. To me, he is the only actor to date that has perfectly balanced the duality of Bruce Wayne and Batman. If I see Bruce Wayne on the street with his Playboy antics, I would not I would not have known that that guy was Batman because Christian Bale does such a good job of balancing both personalities, kind of like Christopher Reeve balancing Clark Kent and Superman. He did such a brilliant job with that. I love Liam Neeson's performance as Ra's al Ghul, such a great villain for the first movie. You also got Michael Caine. You got Morgan Freeman, who's a great addition. You got Gary Oldman, who's Lieutenant Gordon in this movie, but he's still really good. Even Kim Watanabe has a good small part in this film. It's pretty good, along with Tom Wilkinson. Katie Holmes, a little bit miscast as Rachel Dawes. She's not bad in the film. She just sticks out compared to the other actors in the film. And honestly, the recasting in The Dark Knight, I think, actually worked with the character because Maggie was better. We'll get there when we get there. And also the action, even though there's great action in the film, some of it is clumsily put together, but that's only because Christopher Nolan hadn't really done an action movie before. And so some of it is a little choppy at times. But other than that, it's still a fantastic origin story. This movie gets so many things right, especially in how it presents the origin story of Bruce Wayne and how he becomes Batman. And this is how you do a reboot done right. It's one of the best origin stories and reboots that Hollywood has ever made, and you got to thank Christopher Nolan for that.
Yeah, that's a slight pun for me. I'll give my thoughts on that in just a minute. But for my number five, I'm going to pivot ever so slightly to a little movie called The Prestige. This
Okay.
movie rocks. Like, this movie is so much fun and it's so good. I mean, Christian Bale, again, like you brought up, just fantastic. Hugh Jackman. Let's get Hugh Jackman back in a Christopher Nolan movie, please. He was only in one. I mean, it's The Prestige, so of course he crushed it. But I mean, let's get Hugh Jackman back in a Christopher Nolan movie, please. Let's make that happen. But Christian Bale, Hugh Jackman, Michael Caine as Cutter, Scarlett Johansson, Rebecca Hall, the late David Bowie, rest in peace, as Nikola Tesla. You are a legend, Mr. Nolan. We do not deserve you. And of course, you got Andy Serkis in a rare role where you see his face. So that's really cool. But this is, in my opinion, the best usage of Nolan's nonlinear storytelling, with the pieces of the puzzle being on the table, just not arranged properly. And just over the course of the movie, you see one puzzles get pieced one after the other after the other. Literally, the first line of the movie is, "Are you paying attention?" It's like Nolan himself saying, "This may not be important now, but keep this in the back of your mind because it's going to come back and it's going to be great." And it is. So yeah, The Prestige. It's awesome.
Yeah, we'll get to the Prestige when we get there. We're getting to the real heavy hitters now. But
Yeah,
is my number four is Interstellar. And this is a movie that I loved when it came out in 2014. But the more I've sat and rewatched this film, the more I appreciate it. And this is a movie that has grown higher on my Christopher Nolan rankings. With this updated ranking post Oppenheimer, I think this is the first time Interstellar cracked my top five because it's such a amazing experience. And there's some people who believe Christopher Nolan has no emotions, and they look at movies like Dunkirk and Tenet to say that Christopher Nolan has no emotion. And I call bull on that because this movie has so much emotion going for it because you're dealing with the fate of the world. You got humanity on its last legs, and you got Matthew McConaughey making a really hard choice to save the world and do heroic things, but also sacrificing his family in the process. And so this movie is very heartbreaking because of this tough choice and how it impacts our main character. And the more these characters go through the wormhole, even though time acts normally on Earth, years pass in traveling through these wormholes. So the
that,
time is ticking as characters age in front of Matthew McConaughey's. Actually, I was reversed. It's like they don't age in space, but they age on Earth. I
yeah.
messed that up badly.
Decades pass. Decades.
Decades pass. That's right.
And
Uh,
yeah, on your point about Nolan having no emotion, watch the scene where Coop leaves Murph and tell me
yes,
Nolan has no emotion. Like, I
the
will bet
scene where
my the contents of my bank account. If you do not cry in that scene, you can have all of my savings account.
The scene where he leaves, and also the scene where he's watching the footage of his kids growing up in front of his eyes. And even though it's meme where he's like crying and going crazy, it still hits hard. It's such a good moment that brings so much emotions and it adds so much urgency to the plot. I do think the movie has incredible visual effects, very much harkens back to 2001 A Space Odyssey, but it has an actual story this time and it has actual emotion in it. So I'd say this movie is better than 2001 A Space Odyssey, which might be a hot take. I love Hans Zimmer's score. The use of organ in this movie I thought was actually really awesome, and there are some goosebumps moments because of that. Some people don't like the third act. I like the third act. I thought it paid off the story very well. And I like the idea, even though it does seem kind of far fetched, I like the idea of love being a dominant factor in what resolves the story. And I thought it was a very poetic way of ending the film. This all around, this is a movie where the more I've rewatched this film and the more I've sat on it, this has become one of my favorite Nolan movies. And that's why it's at number 4.
Yeah, completely agree. Well, that's your number four. My number four is Batman Begins, the punt from earlier. This movie has the unfortunate distinction of being part one of a trilogy that includes The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises. If this were a standalone Batman movie, I think it would be called one of the best superhero movies of all time. This movie is just, it's fantastic from top to bottom. It's probably the best Batman origin story we're probably ever going to get. It's just, it's it's beautiful. Like, it really is. Uh, there's stuff in here that is like introduced but is never really brought up in the other movies, which I don't know if that was a creative decision made. But you got the Narrows, which are never referenced again. And then you have Scarecrow, which is played by Cillian Murphy. He is freaking fantastic as the Scarecrow. But again, he just so happens, and it's the story of this movie as a whole, he just so happens to be a villain that in a trilogy that also includes Heath Ledger's Joker and Tom Hardy's Bane. If this movie were standalone, it'd be revered to high heaven. But unfortunately, or fortunately, it's really not. So this is a severely underrated. It's severely underrated movie in the sense that it happens to occupy space with The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises. So
Yeah, it is a great movie. But going into the top 3, my number 3 Christopher Nolan movie is Inception. And this is another movie where it took a couple of viewings for it to grow on me, because I don't think 2010 me could comprehend this movie. Like, I thought it had a cool premise, but I thought of Inception like I do Tenet today, where there's some cool stuff in this movie, but it felt like it was confusing for the sake of being confusing, and I struggled to get into it. But the more I've rewatched this movie, the more I really love this movie. And to me, compared to Tenet, the plot in Inception feels more straightforward now. It's just one where you have to really get invested and immersed in the movie to fully get into the plot. And even with the whole dream layer stuff and the multiple dream within dreams, the core of Inception is a man trying to go on one last mission to prove his innocence and to come back to his kids. And so, much like with Interstellar, there is some heart to this movie that does lead to a fantastic payoff. Very ambiguous ending that's still being discussed this day with the spinning top. That's still highly discussed. I love the Hans Zimmer score. Great cast all around, especially Leonardo DiCaprio. You talked about Hugh Jackman only being in one Christopher Nolan movie. Leo has only been in one Christopher Nolan movie, and this is one of his best performances. And I'm surprised that he's not in any other Christopher Nolan movies. The rest of the cast is terrific as well. This movie has so much going for it. I love the structure and the premise of this movie. Very mind bendy stuff, and one of my personal favorites from Christopher Nolan.
Yeah, that's a slight punt. We'll get to that one in just a minute. But for my number three, I'm going with Nolan's most recent film, Oppenheimer. And
Nice.
this would be number one if number one and number two weren't my number one and number two. Oppenheimer is a movie that has just gotten better the more I think about it. I love it to pieces. It's a movie that just, like you were talking about it with it earlier, Jacob, showed that Oppenheimer was a complicated man. He was the right man for the atomic bomb project, the Manhattan Project. However, he was deeply flawed. He was a womanizer. He may or may not have been a communist sympathizer. We will truly never know. He had friends who were sympathizers, but he also wasn't, and it's a whole thing. And just Killian Murphy just did it just to the nines. Like you could not have asked for a better choice for this role than Killian Murphy. But the rest of the cast is just as good, if not better. You got Emily Blunt as Kitty Oppenheimer. You got Matt Damon as Leslie Groves. Robert Downey Jr. showing what I've known all along, the fact that he's not just Iron Man. He is a really good actor, and if you give him something, then he crushes it as Louis Strauss. He's fantastic. Florence Pugh, Josh Hartnett, Casey Affleck, Rami Malek, Kenneth Branagh, Benny Safdie, one of the Safdie brothers is in this. Jason Clarke justifies his entire existence with his role in this movie, and I could go on. It's just one of those movies that just it's just fantastic. And it's my favorite movie of the year so far. It just tops John Wick 4, just barely.
All right, so we're going into the top two now.
Oh boy.
I have you're gonna be surprised at what my top two is, especially with number one. Number two is his most popular movie. I'm gonna go with The Dark Knight. That's my number two.
That's my number two as well. So let's just get this one out of the way right here. I mean, we were a part of a watch along with one third of the Small Talk podcast, Matt Wyatt. So we all our thoughts on this movie are very well known. So I think we can just take the express lane on this one. But yeah, Dark Knight. I mean, what else can we say? It's
Yeah,
fantastic.
yeah, so much to love in that movie. It's actually still my favorite comic book film of all time. I know I said that on the watch party we did earlier this year, but there's just so much that it has going for it. It doesn't even feel like a superhero film, too. It plays more like an action crime drama. And that's what makes it stand out in the genre compared to the others, which are more fantastical in nature. I love the I love the ethics that are placed within the film, especially with the Joker, who's a character that has no rules, but Batman has to break his rules in order to take the Joker down. And there's just some really thoughtful questions that come to play in the film. Heath Ledger is fantastic as the Joker. Aaron Eckhart is severely underrated as Harvey Dent, and his
Agreed.
fall from grace into Two Face is just as compelling as the Batman stuff in this movie. A lot of great action. I love the semi flip is amazing. The Hong Kong sequence is really good. The opening with the Joker is super suspenseful. I love the two boats, the drama with that, and the ethics and morality in that situation. It's just so many amazing stuff in this movie, and one of my all-time favorite movies.
Yeah, everything that you said and more. It's like it's one of those movies that just it it's like 2008 was just a great year for movies, period. Because we got Iron Man and Dark Knight in the same year, and there were countless other examples, but it was just a great year, period. The MCU began in that year, and we got the best Batman movie of all time in that year. So yeah, they were cooking with gas with superhero movies in that year. But why don't you go first, Jacob? What is your number one?
My number one. This is definitely an odd choice for some because not too many people have this as their favorite movie from Nolan. But The Prestige is my favorite film from
It's
Christopher Nolan. I
it's not
have,
it's not as odd as you think. I respect it.
yeah, you don't have. I don't see too many people have this as their number one. But the first time I saw this movie, and I was late to the game on The Prestige. I didn't watch it until after I saw the Dark Knight trilogy, Inception, Interstellar, some of his bigger movies. But as soon as I saw this movie for the first time, I'm like, Yeah, I think this might just be my favorite Christopher Nolan movie. And then rewatching it several times afterwards cements that this one is my favorite. Even though I've seen The Dark Knight and Inception, I think more times, but I still love The Prestige. This has my favorite cast in a Christopher Nolan movie. You got Christian Bale, Hugh Jackman, Rebecca Hall, Scarlett Johansson, Andy Serkis, Michael Caine, even David Bowie as Tesla. This movie had such an epic cast that it blew me away seeing such a stacked ensemble in this movie, even though it feels small and tame now compared to Oppenheimer, but I still love the cast in this movie. And I just thought the premise was very intriguing with the two feuding magicians obsessed with one upping one another, and it leads to some crazy consequences. I think both Christian Bale and Hugh Jackman give very compelling performances, even though they're not the most likable characters. But the drama in it is still very engrossing. That I wanted to see who would outdo who, and I think that's the genius of Nolan at work behind the scenes. This movie also has my favorite twist ending out of any Christopher Nolan movie because the movie plays out like a magic trick. Like the illusion was always there, even in the opening scene, but you don't pick up on it until they reveal it at the very end, which makes the twist all the more brilliant. And I love revisiting this movie, much like similar to how M. Night Shyamalan pulled off his twist in The Sixth Sense. You can rewatch this movie and pick up, oh, the twist was hidden in plain sight. And when you rewatch it, you appreciate the subtle clues that lead up to the twist and make it such a rewarding payoff. And it's not one of those, oh, let's just have a twist for the sake of having a twist and it not making any sense. This twist in The Prestige I thought was actually very clever. It blew my mind when I watched it. It's actually my favorite Nolan film, partially due to the twist and how mind blowing it was. This is all around a fantastic movie. Another one that slept on, like Insomnia, but I'm glad this movie does have a fan base, and I love the small scale approach in this movie as well. You got just some masterful direction in this movie, and of all the Christopher Nolan movies, this one is my favorite.
Did not agree with you more. And so for my number one, it's Inception. This
Yeah,
is the movie.
that's a great choice as well.
This movie is very precious to me. It got me started with Nolan. I remember my dad taking me to see it in July of 2010. I remember it's at the theater that I go to frequently that I've worked at. I remember the standee that was used to promote the movie. It's like core memory stuff right there. I remember from the very first shot that we see of Leo washed up on that beach as Cobb, and we see old Ken Watanabe asking, "Are you here to kill me?" And then he picks up the totem and he spins it. And then Leo's like, "I came here to tell you something." And then smash cuts to him saying, "What is the most resilient parasite?" And I'm like, what is the most resilient parasite? So it instantly hooked me from scene one, and then just the heist that is accomplished here, putting an idea into someone's head, that being Killian Murphy as Robert Fisher, and just the levels of just magic trickery that they have to do in order to pull this off. It's just it's a movie that I can watch 1,000 times and find something new to appreciate about it every single time. Small moments like when Arthur, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, is shooting at the guys on the roof, and Tom Hardy's like, "Sometimes you have to dream a little bigger, darling," and he pulls out a grenade launcher and he shoots at him and blows them up. It's fantastic, and then it just the whole scene in the dream where you meet Maul for the first time and the whole explanation behind that whole thing. It's just the movie's just beautiful. And if you want to put Dark Knight at your number one watching at home, then by all means go and do it. I won't even argue with you. But Inception is just it's borderline perfect for me.
Yeah, that is a great movie as well. I can definitely see why that's your favorite. That is a lot of people's favorite Nolan films. But much like when we ranked, what was that other ranking we
The
did?
Mission Impossible
The
movies.
Mission Impossible ranking. I can see I can see various arguments why these would be your favorite movies. Like I can see why Inception would be your favorite, The Dark Knight. I can see why Interstellar would be your favorite, The Prestige, which was also my favorite. I can also see arguments why Memento, Dunkirk, or even Oppenheimer would be your favorite Christopher Nolan movie because he's just had so many banger movies.
Yeah, there are really no wrong answers when it comes to Nolan. It's just on, like he just is. But this was a rather lengthy ranking, but I'm very satisfied with both of our lists. I pass it off to all of you. What is your favorite Christopher Nolan movie overall? Let us know in the comments section. Love to read what you have to say. And Jacob, this was a privilege to do this with you. Do this with you every week, quite frankly. But tell the people where they can find you.
Well, they can find me on Letterboxd, Twitter, and Facebook, and you can also subscribe to my YouTube channel where I do movie reviews, TV reviews, ranking videos, live streams, occasional music videos as well. What's premiering on the channel this week? I will be premiering my review of Oppenheimer. That'll come to the channel along with a celebrating Disney review of oh wait, which one was it? It was part of my what I watched. I'm sorry, I had a brain fart.
Cinderella 3. It's been a long episode, y'all. So
Yeah,
give Jacob.
yeah, I haven't. I'm actually it's not Cinderella 3. It's carryovers from my last live stream. I'm trying to remember what I did on the
Fox and
last
the
live.
Hound 2, the one you really didn't like.
I did Fox and the Hound 2. That one's already on the channel. It's what's the other live action one I did? I know I just did. Hold on, I gotta look at this real quick. I'm sorry about the brain fart. This normally don't happen. Uh, what was it? Was I'm sorry. I feel so bad for this.
No, don't worry about
It's
it.
the Haunted Mansion. That's what I'm
There it
doing.
is.
The Haunted Mansion with Eddie Murphy. That's gonna drop this week.
Well, Jacob's channel link is in the description. Go give him a subscribe there. As for this channel, the road to Saw 10 marches on with my review of Saw 6. Small Talk episode 6 should be up on the channel now, so go definitely check that out. And yeah, Scary Mania is just around the corner. We're in the month of September. It's crazy to
That's
think about.
that's crazy. Actually, I got one more I forgot to plug. This Thursday night, which will be tomorrow when this video drops. Me and Henry Mockingbird are going to do a watch along of Disney's Fantasia.
Oh, that sounds like fun. So yeah, that'll be on Jacob's channel, like I said. But Scary Mania is coming around the corner. Scorsese month is happening in the month of November, and then December is Chris Mania. So there's a lot of stuff coming to this channel. So if you have not subscribed, do the thing. Leave a like on this video. We drop this podcast every Wednesday, either live or pre-recorded. So you know what to do. But for Jacob Martin, my name is Ryan Cam. We will see you in the next one. You all take care.